The sun dipped low, painting the sky in hues of orange and lavender over the dust-laden fields. Silas trudged through the golden grasses, his shadow stretching long and solitary. Silence enveloped the ranch, only the whisper of the wind breaking the stillness. He'd grown accustomed to the quiet, a comfort in the routine of his days. Then came the wild girl, Elowyn, with tangled hair that caught the light and eyes like storm clouds. She wandered into his world, uninvited yet somehow belonging. Day after day, she watched him from the edges of the pasture, her face a portrait of untamed spirit. Their mornings unfolded in unspoken understanding, each stolen glance a bridge between their solitude. But silence hung heavy in the air, until one fateful evening as shadows danced around them, she took a breath, and with trembling lips whispered his name, Silas. The sun hung low in the sky, casting long shadows over the dusty marketplace where the air was thick with desperation and despair. Elowyn stood on the wooden platform, nerves coiling tightly in her chest like a wild animal ready to spring. Her tangled hair fell in waves over her shoulders, framing her pale, dirt-smeared face. Around her, a crowd murmured, their eyes glinting with greed as they assessed her worth. But it was her brother's face she fixated on, his expression a cold blend of indifference and betrayal. The words he had spoken echoed in her mind. "You are better off in someone else's hands." With each pulse of her heart, she felt the tether of her childhood snap, leaving her floating in a sea of uncertainty. As the auctioneer's gavel struck wood, a wave of fear washed over Elowyn. She wanted to scream, to lash out at the world that had conspired against her. But all that emerged was silence. A girl who had once laughed freely, her voice now stolen, stood silent, a statue among the breathing, eager crowd. She turned her gaze to the dirt beneath her feet, imagining it swallowing her whole, wanting to vanish from existence entirely. The offers flew around her like arrows, each one piercing deeper into her already fragile spirit. She could almost hear her brother's laughter, mocking and cruel, echoing in the back of her mind. A figure emerged from the shadows, tall and imposing with a broad frame that seemed to command the space around him. Silas watched the scene unfold with a wary gaze, a man burdened by the weight of his own secrets. The calloused hands that gripped the brim of his hat had seen more than they should have. They knew what it meant to wrestle with demons. He had come to the market seeking livestock, but the girl on the block ensnared his attention in a way he couldn't quite understand. Her eyes, wide and pleading, spoke a language he had long abandoned. Elowyn's anguish reflected in his own heart, a quiet resonance that made him take a step closer. As bids climbed and shouted offers echoed like thunder through the air, Silas felt a surge of something deep within, a blend of protectiveness and an instinct he had tried to bury. He shifted his weight, contemplating whether to intervene, but he hesitated, chained by his own isolation. The memories of loss and loneliness gripped him tightly, warning against connection. He was a silent rancher who had learned long ago to keep the world at bay, his life punctuated only by the whispers of the wind across the empty fields he tended alone. When the gavel fell, sealing her fate, Elowyn's heart pounded in her chest. She was sold, a product exchanged for the highest price, and though she was led away by her new owner, Silas felt an inexplicable pull to follow. He stepped forward as if drawn by an invisible thread, a flicker of hope igniting within him. He hadn't intended to buy her, yet he felt compelled to claim this fragment of humanity in a world that had shown him nothing but cruelty. In that moment, he raised his hand, voicing a bid that surprised even himself, and silence fell like a heavy shroud in the wake of his declaration. Elowyn turned to him, her breath catching in her throat, a flicker of something, fear, confusion, perhaps even a glimmer of hope, dancing in her wide eyes. As he approached, her heart quickened, an unsteady rhythm of vulnerability and uncertain trust. She had heard tales of cruel masters, but Silas's presence felt different, almost familiar in its strangeness. Yet the walls she had built around her heart were fortified by years of betrayal, leaving her unyielding. She looked away, denying the hint of connection forming in the air between them, retreating into the silence she had chosen for her existence. In the days that followed, Elowen remained a ghost in Silas's home, her presence a shadow that flitted through rooms without making a sound. He would find her staring at the worn wooden floors or tracing patterns in the dust, her lips moving silently as if rehearsing words long lost. Silas tried to bridge the distance, offering small gestures of kindness, a bowl of warm stew, a shared glance during quiet evenings. But her emotional walls remained unyielding, thick as the fences that lined his ranch. He was a spectre to her, a man haunted by his own solitude, and the connection he craved slipped through his fingertips like grains of sand. Silas withdrew further into his own cocoon of silence as the days turned into weeks. He tended to his chores with an uncharacteristic fervor, yearning for a solace that eluded him whenever he turned his gaze towards her. Yet even in the bleakness of his self-imposed isolation, he felt the ache of longing grow into something tangible. Watching her from a distance, he would often catch glimpses of the girl he had rescued, and the weight of the unspoken words hung between them, heavier than the silence itself. The ranch became a battleground of emotions, each person haunted by the past they could not escape. In the quiet of the night, when the stars blanketed the dark sky, Elowen lay awake, her heart heavy with the weight of unexpressed sorrow. She didn't want to feel this way, trapped between the girl she once was and the woman she was becoming. Silas's presence stirred something inside her, a whisper of warmth she had thought long extinguished. Yet the fear of being hurt again held her captive, and the walls around her heart remained unyielding. Emotions flared in her chest, trembling on the brink of release like a candle fighting against the wind. But still, she remained silent, a wild girl bound by the scars of her past and the uncertainty of her future. The sun dipped low in the horizon, soaking the sky in hues of crimson and violet as Elowen stepped onto the gravel path leading to the ranch. The chill of the approaching evening crawled on her skin, a stark contrast to the warm embrace of the summer fields that once surrounded her like a gentle shroud. She clutched her tattered jacket closer to her frame, the sight of the ramshackle wooden house looming in front of her, a jarring reminder of the life she was leaving behind. Each hesitant step echoed her uncertainty, the dry crunch of the stones underfoot punctuating the silence that enveloped the vast expanse of land. Silas stood by the barn, silhouetted against the dying light, his broad shoulders hunched as he adjusted a fraying rope. He had watched the girl approach from a distance, her wild hair dancing in the wind like flames. There was a beauty in her untamed spirit, yet it was shrouded in a thick fog of despair. He turned his gaze to the dusty ground, battling an unexpected swell of warmth at the thought of nurturing something fragile and raw, a stranger as lost as himself. In that moment, he felt a quiet kinship, a flicker of hope igniting beneath his stoic exterior. As Elowen crossed the threshold of the ranch, the air thickened with the scent of hay and earth. It felt foreign, yet oddly comforting, a stark contrast to the chaos she had fled. She wandered cautiously through the cramped quarters, noticing the sparse furnishings, a worn table, rusting utensils, and faded photographs hanging, their subjects frozen in time. Here, silence reigned, broken only by the occasional creak of wood or the distant low of cattle. She felt the weight of the stillness pressing on her, an invisible bond that tied her to this place and its lone occupant. Days bled into one another, marked by the rhythm of chores and the quiet companionship of solitude. Silas found solace in his daily routine, tending to the animals and mending fences, his weathered hands moving deftly as the sun rose and fell. Yet with each passing moment, the absence of Elowen's voice churned in his chest. He had expected a girl of her age to be filled with laughter and life, yet she remained an enigma wrapped in silence. He often glanced her way as she worked, her hands gentle and deliberate, a wildflower in the midst of the untamed fields. Elowen immersed herself in the tasks assigned to her, sweeping the barn, feeding chickens, her fingers discovering each chore's rhythm. But her heart felt heavy, the memories of her past swirling like ghosts in her mind. She could feel Silas watching her, a palpable connection humming in the air. Despite her unbroken silence, she sensed his kindness, a subtle strength that drew her in like the warm glow of a hearth on a winter night. She never initiated conversation, yet there was an unspoken understanding between them, a bridge built on the shared weight of their histories. As twilight fell, casting long shadows over the landscape, Elowen often wandered to the edge of the property, gazing out at the rolling hills bathed in the soft light of dusk. She found a certain comfort in the solitude of the land, a freedom that she'd longed for in her previous life. The night sky soon emerged, jeweled with countless stars, and in that expanse she found herself dreaming of a voice, a whisper that could break free from her guarded heart. The thought of speaking felt like a distant star, a light too far away to reach. Gradually, Silas began to notice the delicate changes within Elowen. The tightness in her shoulders began to soften, and her eyes sparkled with a flicker of mischief as she chased after a stray calf. He felt a stirring within himself, a sense of responsibility to protect her, to draw her out of the isolation she had wrapped around herself. Little moments blossomed into something significant. The way she would smile at him, however fleeting, or the way her laughter would bubble up like a spring, caught off guard by a playful gesture. One evening, as the sun set with a final burst of brilliance, Silas found Elowen back at the edge of the property, staring up at the sky. He approached her, feeling an urge to breach the silence that hung thick between them, a barrier he had grown tired of acknowledging. He took a breath, the air thickening with unspoken words, and as he stepped closer, he felt the warmth of her presence envelop him, fragile, yet unyielding. "Elowen," he finally spoke, the name heavy with the weight of unsaid things. The name, like a key, turned in the lock of her heart, and for the first time in many moons, she felt something awaken within her. The darkness that had clung to her began to tremble, and with a breath that felt like a release, she turned to face him, sending ripples through their quiet world. The syllables formed upon her lips, soft as a ghostly echo, and she whispered his name, Silas. The sun peered over the horizon, casting long shadows across the silent ranch, the world awakening in hues of gold and orange. Silas stood at the edge of the corral, watching Elowen brush down the horses with a gentle touch. The rhythmic swish of the brush blended harmoniously with the soft nickers and snorts from the animals. Day after day, this had become their routine, an unspoken dance between silence and understanding. Yet each morning felt like a new lesson, one he was eager to learn, but one that seemed just out of reach. Elowen moved like the wind, fluid and unbound, her long hair braided and adorned with wildflowers. Her calloused hands were beautiful in their strength. They spoke of resilience, of a life lived in the wild, yet contained a delicate gentleness that resonated with the horses. Silas often caught himself watching her, mesmerized by the intensity of her focus. She didn't just tend to the animals, she connected with them, weaving an invisible thread of trust and affection. An urge to know her deeper stirred within him, yet the distance she kept was palpable, a barrier of silence that felt impenetrable. As the days rolled into weeks, Silas attempted to bridge the chasm with gestures, capturing her attention through small acts, offering her coffee as they peered over the fields, sharing the weight of a heavy saddle, or showing her the best spots to watch the sunset. There were fleeting glances, the corners of her mouth curling ever so slightly, but her eyes remained untouchable, a vast ocean of unspoken thoughts. It left a lingering ache in his chest, a pull towards her that ignited a mix of hope and frustration. Something in her seemed both wild and fragile, like a flower sprouting from the crack of concrete. One evening, after a long day of chores, they sat together on the porch, leaning into the creaking wood beneath them. The air was thick with the scent of hay and the promise of rain. Silas had taken to sharing stories of his youth, his voice a soft murmur that danced in the twilight. Elowen listened intently, her expression unchanging. But Silas could sense her absorbing his words, the way the wind swirled around them. He spoke of dreams, of the world beyond the ranch, of the freedom that awaited beyond the mountains. But with every word, he saw her posture tighten, her body retreating like a frightened animal. "Do you not dream?" he ventured, breaking the stillness between them. The question hung in the air, thick with vulnerability. Her gaze dropped to the intricate patterns on the wooden floor, fingers fiddling with the hem of her shirt. The silence that followed felt like an avalanche, crushing the space he'd hoped to fill. Underneath the weight of it, Silas's pulse quickened, a rush of insecurity coursing through him. Had he crossed a line? He longed for her voice, but the quiet stretched out endlessly, each moment a reminder of barriers unbroken. It was then, in the depths of that silence, that Elowen hesitated for a heartbeat longer than before. Her fingers stilled, and her eyes flickered towards him, a spark igniting something long dormant within her. With a breath that trembled on the edge of sound, she lifted her chin, as if gathering the courage to share a piece of her heart. Silas held his breath, the world narrowing to just the two of them on that porch, the stars above blinking in cautious anticipation. But before she could speak, a distant rumble of thunder echoed across the valley, sending a shiver of alarm through her. The moment fragmented like glass, scattering the intimacy they had almost achieved. Elowen's expression morphed into something resembling fear, and she stood abruptly, her wild hair whipping about her face as she turned towards the impending storm. Silas watched helplessly as she retreated into the house, leaving him alone on the porch, the heavy weight of unuttered words swirling in the air. Days became a blur of rain-soaked mornings and grey afternoons. The storm that had swept through their moment took root in Elowen, cloaking her in an unfamiliar sadness. She withdrew into her silence more completely, her vibrant connection to the animals turning somber as she went through the motions of their routine like a ghost. Silas felt the chasm between them deepen, an echo of all that remained unsaid hanging in the air, heavy and oppressive. Night after night he lay awake, the shadows in his room whispering doubts that kept him company. Yet curiosity clung to Silas like the remnants of the storm. What storm had brewed within Elowen that left her so vulnerable? What dreams had she buried beneath her silence? Each question drove him to seek answers, to unravel the beautiful enigma she was, even as the emotional friction of their distance sparked a loneliness he could no longer bear. And in the quiet moments, he found himself longing for her whisper. To hear his name spoken by her lips would feel like a promise, a bridge across the silence that wrapped around them both. Elowen sat on the porch, her bare feet propped up on the weathered rail, swaying gently with the rhythm of the wind. It was early evening, and the golden hour draped the ranch in a warm, ethereal glow. Silas was out in the fields, his sturdy form silhouetted against the fading sun as he tended to the horses. She watched him work, his brow furrowed in concentration, and felt a twinge in her chest that she could not name. Each day that passed, the silence between them grew heavier, thick with unspoken thoughts and feelings neither dared voice. The air was tinged with the scent of hay and horses, yet it was the silence that enveloped Elowen more tightly than any embrace. Her past had taught her that words could cut deeper than any knife, and so she had learned to keep them at bay. Silas, with his gentle eyes and strong hands, had drawn her in, offering a sanctuary from the world she had fled. But now, the weight of her unvoiced fears loomed as large as the darkening sky, and the shadows crept closer with each passing moment. As the sun dipped below the horizon, Silas returned, brushing the sweat from his brow. He paused at the porch steps, his gaze catching Elowen's, and for a fleeting moment they shared a silence that felt charged, electric with unacknowledged yearning. He stepped forward, the wood creaking beneath his weight, and the warm light illuminated the worry that etched itself on his face. Something, an unnameable tension, crackled between them, a weight that neither could place, and Eloin's heart raced as she fought the urge to voice the tangled thoughts spinning in her mind. "Are you all right?" Silas finally asked, his voice a low rumble that sent vibrations through her. But as he spoke, she saw the flicker of uncertainty in his eyes, the way he shifted his weight from one foot to the other, as if preparing himself for an answer that might shatter the fragile peace they had built. Eloin shook her head, the words dying on her tongue. She was fine, of course, but her heart said otherwise, silent screams echoing in her mind, begging for release. In response, she offered a tight-lipped smile, an attempt to shield him from the truth she couldn't bear to confront. The tightness in her chest felt like a vice, squeezing tighter every moment they remained in this fragile balance of unacknowledged feelings. Silas studied her for a moment, his brow knitting in concern. He stepped closer, close enough that she could see the tiny flecks of gold in his brown eyes. "You don't have to pretend with me, you know. I can see when you're hurting." His voice softened, a gentle invitation to bridge the chasm that had grown between their souls. Eloin felt a warmth flood through her, a surge of vulnerability she had not anticipated, yet fear held her tongue captive. In that moment, she wished to be brave, to tell him everything. The ache of her past, the scars of silence that lingered like shadows in her heart. But just as she felt the walls begin to crumble, a distant memory crept in, a reminder of the harsh words spoken in anger and fear. Her breath caught in her throat, the flickering hope began to dim as she turned her gaze away from him, looking instead to the vast, unending fields bathed in twilight. Silas sighed, the sound heavy with frustration and concern. "You can't carry this alone," he urged, his voice barely above a whisper, as if afraid the darkening night would swallow them whole. He reached out, brushing a stray lock of hair behind her ear, and in that simple gesture, the unspoken words coiled tightly around her heart, threatening to suffocate her. The knot in Eloin's stomach twisted painfully, and she looked back at him, tears suddenly pooling in her eyes. She felt exposed in her silence, her guard slipping as the weight of his unwavering gaze bore down on her. Quietly, she whispered his name, a tentative breath of sound that caught them both off guard. It hung between them, suspended in the twilight air, filled with everything she had been too afraid to say. And in that moment, a flicker of understanding ignited, illuminating the dark corners of her heart, as she realized perhaps they were both wild souls, longing for connection in a world that had taught them to remain silent. Eloin sat on the edge of the weathered porch, her bare feet swinging slightly above the dust, her gaze fixed on the sprawling expanse of the ranch. The weary sun began its descent, casting a warm golden hue that wrapped the landscape in a gentle embrace. Silas stood at the edge of the field, his silhouette a strong contrast against the fiery sky, laboring to gather the last of the hay bales. Every movement spoke of years of hard work, yet there was a quiet rhythm to it, a dance that seemed to mimic the wind swaying the tall grasses. Eloin watched him, a stillness in her heart, the kind that felt like the calm before a storm. Days had turned into weeks since Silas found her in the woods, a wild girl wrapped in leaves and shadows. They had built their lives together at the ranch, each day layered with unvoiced understanding. Silas had taken to teaching her little things, how to mend a fence, how to coax a stubborn horse, how to gather firewood. In return, Eloin had shown him the gentleness buried beneath his rugged exterior, igniting warmth in the corners of his heart he believed had long been extinguished. But their bond was silent, an invisible thread spun from shared moments, each delicate yet unbreakable. As dusk painted the world in strokes of purple and indigo, Eloin felt a familiar tug in her chest. She slipped off the porch, her feet landing softly against the wooden planks, making her way towards Silas. He glanced at her, surprise flickering in his deep-set eyes. She picked up a loose strand of hay that had clung to his shirt, her fingers brushing against his arm in a fleeting gesture. It was the simplest of acts, but it sent a shiver through the air between them, a spark igniting the stillness around their unspoken words. Silas paused, the weight of the day slowly lifting in her presence. He looked down at her slender fingers, feeling an inexplicable sense of comfort wash over him. In her silent world, Elowen had learned to communicate in gestures, in soft smiles and fleeting glances. This time, she met his gaze, unyielding and clear, as if she were trying to bridge the chasm of their unvoiced connection. The way she stared at him, searching for something in his expression, stirred a longing deep within. He felt seen, not for the rancher he was, but for the man he could be. Elowen stepped closer, reaching her hand to his cheek, brushing away a smudge of dirt that remained from the day's toil. It was more than a touch. It was a promise, a silent vow that they understood one another in ways words could never capture. Silas's breath hitched, and the weight of her simple gesture settled deep within his chest, breaking the dam of loneliness he'd carried for too long. He turned toward her fully, the world around them fading into the background, leaving only the two of them under the sprawling sky. They lingered in that moment, the air humming with possibilities. Elowen's heart raced as she sensed the shift, the connection poised on the edge of something greater than either of them understood. She leaned in, her forehead resting against his, their breaths mingling in the cool evening air. For the first time, she wanted to say something, to break the silence not with words, but with her presence, with this intimacy that felt drawn from the depths of their shared existence. Silas closed his eyes, allowing the moment to wash over him like a cool breeze. He could feel Elowen's warmth radiating against him, grounding him in a way he had been unaware he needed. In that fragile space, he whispered her name softly, the sound barely escaping his lips. It was a question and an answer all at once, reverent and tentative, as if the mere act of saying it could fracture the intimacy they'd woven. Elowen's response was subtle, her breath catching, her pulse quickening as she savored the sound like a melody she had longed to hear. In that shared breath, each found within the other a glimpse of refuge. The walls built by years of solitude began to crumble, revealing raw emotions they had both been too afraid to confront. Elowen lifted her head, meeting his gaze with newfound determination, the faintest hint of a smile playing upon her lips. It was a soft promise that, despite the silence, there would always be words unspoken between them, a language all their own. As the first stars began to twinkle overhead, Silas took Elowen's hand in his, fingers intertwining seamlessly, as if they had been woven together by fate itself. The ranch stretched behind them, wild, untamed, yet now filled with the whispers of connection that echoed in the twilight. In that sacred moment, they understood that the silence between them held the power to resonate louder than any word could. The sun dipped low in the sky, casting long shadows across the vast expanse of silent ranch. Elowen stood at the edge of the corral, her fingers tracing the rough wooden slats. She watched Silas move with the horses, the way he spoke to them in soft murmurs that seemed to calm their wild spirits. There was a rhythm to his voice, a soothing cadence that both comforted and terrified her. She yearned to join in, to find the words that had long been trapped in her throat, but every instinct told her to stay silent. Days had turned into weeks, and the silence that once felt like a protective barrier now felt like a heavy shroud. Elowen found herself caught in a tumultuous storm of emotion. She felt the weight of unspoken words. They pressed against her chest, urging to escape. Moments of laughter with Silas would ignite a flicker of hope, a reminder of the life she had before the darkness enveloped her. Yet each time the urge to speak ignited within her, fear extinguished it, leaving only a hollow ache. While the sun set behind the hills, a gust of wind swept through the ranch, rustling the dry grasses and sending a shiver down Elowen's spine. Silas was close, his presence filling the gaps in her heart where the unsaid things lived. She loved the way he looked at her, with kindness glimmering in his dark eyes, as if he could see her soul. But how could she let him in when she couldn't even let her own voice out? That was the crux of her torment, a wild girl tamed by silence, yet yearning to break free. One evening, as they sat together on the porch, the golden light spilling over them like honey, Silas turned to her. "You know, sometimes I think the whole world would be better if people just said what was in their hearts," he said, his voice low and contemplative. Elowen felt her breath catch, his words wrapped around her like a noose, tightening with each heartbeat. If only she could share the storm of emotions swirling within her, just as he did so effortlessly. Elowen stole a glance at him, longing surging within her. In that moment, she imagined them unearthing the stories buried deep inside her, letting them emerge like wildflowers after a frost. But even as hope blossomed, so did a fierce knot of fear. What if the words that crawled out of her mouth were jagged stones instead of petals? What if Silas recoiled from her truth? Her inner conflict raged, a battle between the desire to be heard and the instinct to remain hidden. As the night deepened, a crowded silence settled around them, punctuated by the soft chirping of crickets. The stars above twinkled like distant dreams, and in that moment, Elowen felt an overwhelming urge to shatter the stillness. Silas leaned back against the porch rail, looking up at the sky, lost in thought. She could see the way he breathed, the rise and fall of his chest echoing the chaos within her. It was time. The choice lay at her feet like an open door. In the depths of her mind, Elowen reached for her voice, feeling the smooth contours of the words she had longed to say. She focused on Silas's profile, the way the moonlight danced around him, and for the first time she felt the fierce nature of her resolve. With trembling hands, she felt the swell of emotion deep inside her, igniting her heart and spilling over the edges of her silence. "Silas," she whispered, her voice barely rising above a breath. The syllables rolled off her tongue like stones tumbling down a cliff, and she felt the fear of silence start to dissipate. Silas turned sharply, his dark gaze landing on her with the weight of 1,000 questions. The air between them thickened with unspoken tension, a fraying thread waiting to snap. She felt her heart race, the words she had hidden away now roaring to life, pushing against her lips, demanding their moment. Elowen didn't know if she could repeat his name, or if she would spill her heart like a waterfall. She could barely contain the surge of emotion that erupted within her, and yet it was liberating, exhilarating. "Silas," she said again, this time more firmly. The sound rang like a bell, breaking the spell of silence that had tethered her for so long. In his eyes, she saw a flicker of recognition, an understanding that transcended words. Time slowed in that moment, and for the first time, Elowen felt the intoxicating blend of fear and freedom, two sides of the same coin. She was no longer just a wild girl hidden in shadows. She was on the cusp of emerging, a truth waiting to be freed, a whisper waiting to become a roar. The sun dipped low, casting long shadows across the verdant hills that surrounded the ranch. Silas leaned against the weathered fence, his gaze fixed on the horizon where Elowen often disappeared, chasing the wildflowers that danced under the golden light. Days had passed since they first ventured into the meadow together, their unspoken bond deepening with each shared moment. He could feel her presence, a soft whisper against the solitude he had embraced for so long. Yet the absence of her voice hung heavy in the air, a silence that both soothed and tormented him. Elowen had always been a wild spirit, untamed and free, her laughter echoing through the fields like a gentle breeze. But it was the quiet wonder in her eyes that had captured Silas. He often watched her, lost in her own world, conjuring unseen magic among the flowers. He remembered the first time she picked daisies, weaving them into a crown and adorning herself with a crown of innocence. That moment became a haunting melody in the symphony of their days, a bittersweet reminder of how much they had to say, yet never did. Tonight, the fire crackled, and the scent of burning wood filled the air with warmth. Silas placed another log on the fire, its flames dancing in tune with the flickering shadows on the cabin walls. Elowen sat nearby, her hair illuminated like spun gold, her legs tucked under her as she focused on the glowing embers. He could see the thoughts swirling in her mind, a world of unspoken words captured behind her serene exterior. Silas felt a pang in his heart, a longing to hear the sound of her voice, to break through the silence that cocooned them. Suddenly, a sudden gust of wind swept across the porch, scattering leaves and sending a shiver through the air. Elowen looked up, her eyes wide as if she were seeing something beyond the earthly realm. Silas followed her gaze, and for a fleeting moment, he felt the rush of time standing still. The fire crackled louder, and the night unfolded around them, draping the world in a cloak of stars. It was as if the universe conspired to hush their surroundings, inviting the unsaid to spill forth into the open. Silas took a deep breath and stepped closer to her. "Elowen," he murmured, the name slipping from his lips like a prayer. He searched her eyes, where he hoped to find the courage that had always eluded him. The weight of his unexpressed feelings hung thick in the air, wrapping around them both. In that heartbeat of silence, he imagined the words he could never articulate, the feelings that swelled within him like a tide, threatening to break. With a suddenness that startled him, she turned her face toward him, her expression radiant, yet vulnerable. Silas's breath caught in his throat as he saw the flicker of something deep within her, a spark igniting the quietude. He took a step closer, and within that silence, the walls they built began to tremble. "Please, Elowen," he urged gently, "you can tell me anything." Her lips parted, and for a moment, Silas feared she might retreat into silence once more. But instead there was an urgency, a glimmer of determination shining in her eyes. She leaned forward slightly, as if the world around them faded into obscurity, and all that remained was the space between them. Silas held his breath, his heart pounding in anticipation, the air thick with possibilities. "Silas," she whispered, the name slipping from her lips like a secret finally spoken. The sound shattered the silence, each syllable ringing clear and pure, echoing against the walls of his heart. He felt an overwhelming rush of emotions, like the first hint of dawn after a long, dark night. The name hung in the air, a thread connecting them, binding their souls in a harmony that had long been missing. Tears sparkled in Elowen's eyes, and Silas stepped closer, reaching out to brush a stray strand of hair behind her ear. "You spoke," he breathed, disbelief mingling with joy. Her eyes shone with a reflection of raw emotion, her wild spirit now tethered to the warmth of his presence. In that moment, amidst the flickering firelight, the silence that once loomed around them transformed into a sanctuary of shared hopes and dreams, words woven together in an eternal promise. The night embraced them, the stars above celebrating the birth of their newfound freedom, and Silas knew that the wild girl had finally found her voice. Elowen stood at the edge of the fading twilight, the last embers of sun spilling golden light across the horizon. Silas, his hands weathered and strong, felt the gentle brush of her presence beside him. The ranch lay quiet, a canvas of stillness. The rustling grass whispered secrets only they could understand. With a delicate touch, she reached for a wildflower, its fragile petals trembling in the evening breeze. She knelt, offering it to him, her eyes shimmering like the stars that began to punctuate the sky. Silas accepted the flower, their fingers brushing, a fleeting spark igniting the air between them. The world around them fell into a hush, the wind cradling their silence. In that moment he understood the language of her heart, the stories woven in the silence they shared. Slowly, Elowen turned her gaze to the horizon, where the first star blinked awake. She leaned closer, her breath a soft wind, and for the first time he felt her name linger on his lips, unspoken yet profoundly heard. As the moon rose, casting silver shadows on the earth, they stood together, bound by unvoiced promises and the wild, uncharted territory of love. The night embraced them, a sanctuary of understanding,